So when we had people come to this land, we loved the fact that they were people, as we are, the divine creations of a huge long-range evolutionary process of the earth. And we thought the ideas are not so important to us. Ideas come, ideas go. They're ephemeral. And people are tangible. So we accommodated them thinking that they would accept and receive whatever benefits we had acquired over millennia. Om Gurubhyo Namaha. So the topic that we're talking about has become contemporary over the last 6 to 12 months more than at any other time. Up until that time, the Hindu abroad, the Indic identity abroad, was a little bit of an exotic oddity in most countries. Strange people, funny habits, dots on their head and odd but tasty food, a pleasant addition to the colour of most societies and communities. And we enjoyed that in most of the nations where our communities have settled. We lived in silo communities, so we had our own little ecosystem. We put our own shops into place, we had our own Hindi classes and dance, tuition and everything else, and we lived very much in a little silo. Immigrant experience as everybody has. That changed dramatically in 1993, and in 1993 it was very specific and targeted, where the results of a confrontation between India and Pakistan immediately resulted in attacks on Hindu temples up and down the country. And I do have on record a list of the specific damage. It was almost £1.2 million. But even then, it was a silo community attacking another silo community. We saw the demographics and the geopolitics of the subcontinent played out on the streets of the United Kingdom. And the authorities responded with immediacy and restored tranquility and harm and prevented major harm very, very quickly. Life settled back down to normal, and we carried on. Last year, we in the United Kingdom were almost 1.1 million people. 1.1 million people of Indic origin in the UK. I think the total Indian origin, including Buddhists, Sikhs, Jains, and everybody else, came to about 1.4 million. The community was touted as a model minority. Our profile was everything you could ask for. We had perhaps just under 2% of the population. We were contributing 6% to GDP, 379 people in prison, and all of them for white-collar crimes. And our contribution to the exchequer was accepted as being a very good thing. Every year when a politician wanted to curry favour, I've been wanting to use that for a long time, every time a politician wanted to curry favour, they would arrive at our mandirs, we would welcome them with garlands, lots of pictures would go out, mithai would be exchanged, and then we would settle back down. But we have seen one strange trend which seems to have been increasing, and we have noted it, and it happened after 2014. There is no doubt that the synchronicity is related to events that have happened here. And what we saw was a gentle, persistent maligning of the Hindu community for their religious identity. In 2013, before the election, we had one incident, and that was for the first time in our history, and in fact the first time in the history of the British Parliament, legislation was presented which addressed one religious minority alone. And the evidence that was presented to support this repeatedly mentioned the word Hindu, Hindu, Hindu. The evidence was very flimsy, didn't bear scrutiny, but even then it was presented as though it was a mountain of research performed by people of unimpeachable characteristics and credentials that one would be traditionally happy to accept at face value. It asserted that Hindus were discriminating against other Hindus on the basis of caste. There was no evidence of it. Myself, I had worked for a long period of time amongst the Hindu Samaj, and never had somebody come to me and said, on the basis of my caste, I was treated differently to anybody else. Not in the mandirs, not in any other sphere. We have, as all societies do, the jostling for pride, where one community is over ebulliently expressing its traditions and stepping over the mark to make the remarks that they're better than another community. Pride in one's ancestry is wonderful. Everybody should be proud of their ancestry. And it's only when discrimination occurs that there is a potential problem. We never had that in the United Kingdom. And yet those of you who have perhaps read the book or seen the videos I did on the subject, or even watched the video of Lord Harry speaking in Parliament, you would think it was a terrible, terrible crime that was being perpetrated on such a huge scale and so frequently that they had to rush to legislate. That was the beginning of this whole slow, gentle increase. We fortunately managed to rebut it and then settle back down into a state of reasonable traditional Hindu somnolence, which is just get on with what we're doing and ignore the wider world. And then we had another instance where the establishment pretty much attacked a young lady of Hindu origin, Rashmi Samant in Oxford, and we again had to step forward, and we noticed that the profile was the same. An allegation was made, it was unsubstantiated, it was unsupported. And then what happened would be that if we rebutted it, the establishment would challenge our credentials, would challenge the veracity of our position. What's called victim shaming would start to happen. But it happened at an institutional level. We had encountered the odd bit of friction from the average person on the street, and that happens everywhere. You see it on the streets of Punjab and Gujarat, where one community is jostling with another. But we saw it from the institutions, and that rang an alarm bell. Nothing really changed until Leicester happened. And what Leicester has done is really brought to a head everything that had happened before. And we saw a concerted attempt by every pillar of the state and institutions to deny what had happened, to ignore what had happened, and then perhaps even to conceal it and deflect attention away from the real perpetrators. And that was a surprise. That was a wake-up call. I had written a paper a few years ago in which I put forward a proposition that Hindus would leave the United Kingdom and seek to come back to their homeland, ancestral homeland, if there were 3 or 4 steps completed. If a young man had died on the streets of Leicester, and I saw the wounds that were inflicted on one of our Hindu young men, fortunately he survived, but had he died, then I think we would have been at that point where families would say, our safety it's compromised and we're not protected by the state. You see, ultimately we have a relationship with the state, and that is that we delegate to them the authority to protect us, and we relinquish our natural right to protect ourselves using force. And if the state doesn't provide that, then all of a sudden we are at a point where you have to make a decision. Do we make our own arrangements, or do we then leave or move somewhere else? This is a profile of our community, and I'm sure many of you will have seen that it happened in Uganda, other parts of East Asia. Obviously the Kashmiri Pandit situation is exactly the same. We're seeing the same profile now emerge in places like Fiji, which has traditionally had a very good Sanatani community. We're seeing the same in Mauritius, where we visited and did some research as well. So there is something happening. At one particular point in time, we are very much appreciated, welcomed, embraced, and presented as a model minority. And then something happens, and when that something happens, we wake up to a different reality. So I think the time has come where we need to know what it is about our identity which makes us who we are, and what is it about our identity, and at what point do we move to that stage where we then are perceived as a threat and violence is directed towards us? It would be useful to know. Having spent a lot of time in the archives and digging through records and files, I've put together a proposition, and the conclusion that I come to, I will present to you at the end. But my hope is to leave you with a conclusion that you will then consider further, and the ramifications. I'm going to present a scenario. We're called infidels by the rest of the world, so I'm not expecting anybody to accept it. I don't need anybody to accept it. I'm happy for you to dismiss it. But just to give it some consideration and see whether it bears scrutiny and withstands the test of time over the next few years. So, what is this Indic identity? Well, firstly, we are all creatures of reason. Our tradition is based on the faculty of being able to scrutinize something, understand it, and then come to a decision. And the whole of the Bhagavad Gita is that exercise where Arjuna is stuck, he is unable to make a decision. At the end of the Gita, he then makes a decision. And so this is the journey that we all very comfortably take. It suits who we are and what we do. So I thought, let's define what this Indic identity is. Now, if I were to define it, I would probably start at one of the famous sayings, the four Purusharthas we all know: Kam, Arth, Dharma and Moksha. Now, I prefer to talk about them in that order because they actually fit very well to human evolution. Kam is a fundamental that's built into all of us, the passion to move forward, the motive energy of creation and recreation. Artha is the material wealth that we need to sustain it. And then Dharma is a strange thing, and I'll come to that in a few moments. We have got so much confusion over what the word Dharma actually means. And I'm going to try and clarify that and maybe even draw a line in the sand and say, this is what Dharma means and everybody else is wrong. And we'll see how that is accepted or not. And then moksha. And moksha is something which doesn't exist as a concept in pretty much any other society with the clarity that we have it defined. So the heart of what we have received from our ancestors and rishis is that each of us opens our eyes here and finds ourselves in this construct. We go through to a point when we close our eyes, and in between we experience degrees of anand, joy, bliss. There are many names for it. But anand and the pursuit of anand is at the heart of every human activity. Nobody does something deliberately to experience suffering. There is an element of anand in pretty much every choice that we make. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, as Krishnaji tells us, even the joy that a gambler feels, that anand is anand. Now, the one thing about us is we have these four Purusharthas all present. If you look at other societies, as I did, I found that Kam is present and they derive benefit and anand from Kam, as well as the pursuit of Artha. But Dharma is absent. And that's one thing that marks us as different in terms of our identity, the difference between those two. The other element of our vision was that we identified what a human being is better than anybody else has done. We turned attention outwards, and then we turned attention inwards, and we came up with this incredible vision, a darshan, that at the center of our being there is something, and it is Anand incarnated. And if you could place your attention there, then you would transcend all material boundaries and requirements, and moksha arises. That's a fundamental part of our identity. Now, it's fundamental because we make decisions on the basis of those four Purusharthas. Other societies make decisions on a different matrix. They don't make decisions on the basis of Dharma. They don't make decisions on the basis of moksha. And so whenever we've encountered them, whenever our identity has encountered them, the length it takes us to recognize that they are not dharmic is the length of our suffering, is the duration of our suffering. And that's going to be a part of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to put a statement into play about Dharma at this moment. Dharma is mistranslated as religion, as spiritual paths, etc., etc. We have the word parampara and pant. which better describe religious traditions. And one thing that's noteworthy in our traditions is that we do not have any toxic paramparas. A fundamental part of our identity is that we do not have othering going on. You may have a Hanumanji tradition in one group and then a Sri Ramchandraji tradition in another group. And there's no denigration, there's no vilification, there's no othering. It's an acceptance of another parampara as a valid route. And that's the limit of Sarva Dharma Sambhava. We have non-toxic, non-othering paramparas. Communities which are still stuck in Kam and Arth, their identity has an element of toxicity in their paramparas. So when we had people come to this land, we loved the fact that they were people, as we are, the divine creations of a huge long-range evolutionary process of the earth. And we thought the ideas are not so important to us. Ideas come, ideas go. They're ephemeral. And people are tangible. So we accommodated them thinking that they would accept and receive whatever benefits we had acquired over millennia. The identity that came in two waves, and I'll turn to it in more detail, didn't adhere to that. So Dharma is important to define at this moment. And Dharma has lots of scriptural definitions, but I want to contemporize it so that not only do we feel it up here, we feel it here, we recognize it. If imagine there was an apple here. Now an apple is a fruit, and at a particular point in time it changes colour. Our eyes have got rods and cones which can detect a change in colour. When it's ready to eat, the taste of its flesh is really wholesome for us. Our tongue finds anand in it. So there's a dialogue going on, there's a communication going on. Dogs see in monochrome, so they can't see when an apple is ready for consumption. That dialogue is going on between every single element of creation. There is a language, there's a communication. And when you eat an apple, the seeds inside have got this little black coating which withstands hydrochloric acid, which is what we have in our stomachs. So somewhere, somebody, some process architected an apple to be something that's good for us to eat. And part of the bigger process, we distribute seeds so that it's multiplying and it replenishes itself. That language which is spoken between every single part of creation is the language of Dharma. It's a harmony, it's a rhythm, it's a coexistence whereby everything has a purpose, it derives satisfaction from its purpose, and then it replenishes itself. Every single piece of creation is created as a dharmic being. Creation is a dharmic event. The birth of a human being is a dharmic event. And our identity says that life is good, that a person is good, the fact of existence is good. Other traditions deny that. Other traditions and identities are based upon denying that very fundamental fact that creation and existence is good. We're the only group who've ever said that every human being who is born as a divine ansh, as a fragment of divinity. And so there is nothing inherently unpleasant about them. And instinctively, we behave according to Dharma. But the only creature which can do something which is adharmic is us. Every other creature is bound by its instincts. Even the seasons for reproduction are part of a much larger symphony. They don't have the choice to override it. And because we have the capacity of moksha, i.e. of leaving this whole creation, that one capacity which allows us to see into the depths of existence is the one capacity which can become confused, which can be subverted, which can be corrupted, which can be crippled. And that's when an adharmic idea set starts to come into play. So this is who we are, and this is what our identity is. So if you see how that plays out, whenever we go to another nation, we know who we are, and we are living a dharmic existence. And as long as what we're doing is contributing to the well-being of any society, we're really welcome. They love to have our output, they love to have our GDP. They want us to look after their elders in the hospitals. They want us to teach students and children in schools. All of those things are producing Kam and Arth for any society. And we do it as a dharmic activity, which is why we thrive so quickly. Any society where we go to, whether it's somebody who goes from rural Punjab and goes to Canada or whatever, we work hard. You know, we fit in, we understand what we need to do to succeed and to contribute. And we do it without any reference to the legal framework of any country. I mentioned in the UK we only have 379 people in prison. That leaves almost 1 million people who are living according to the rules of the nation without ever having studied a penal code. So there is something that we carry in our identity, which is the dharmic aspect of what we are, and that's what defines us. That is my Indic identity definition, which I'll submit for further scrutiny. A society is nothing more than a whole bunch of people doing things and living together, working out how to exist. So for us, we had a society which started a long, long time ago, perhaps, for my hypothesis, as based on Kam. We had the occupancy of a region from the Himalayas down to Kanyakumari, which is an incredibly fertile region, protected from the north by a ring of mountains and from the bottom by 3 oceans. And in this climate, a very supportive, fertile climate, we had a period of complete peace and tranquility for the best part of 5,000 years. And so we have a civilizational arc which starts with Kam and the basic passions, move to the acquisition of Arth, but not being imprisoned by it. And then we started to see this harmony that I spoke about. We had full stomachs, roofs over our heads, mango trees on every corner. And so we didn't need to fight for existence, so we contemplated. And our rishis mastered the art of scrutiny and contemplation. And that's when they had a glimpse of this dance that I call Dharma. And Dharma is that which encapsulates, encompasses and supports everything else. So it is literally the macro vision of creation. Does anybody have a clue as to what Maya means? I've tried to give a really clear understanding of what Dharma is, and I'm hoping that you've all found it slotted into your thinking that, yeah, that sounds okay, we're happy to accept that. Maya is mistranslated as illusion. You know, I referred to this as creation. Something that is created has a start date and an end date, so it's temporary. Although it appears to be eternal, it's not. It has a start and end date. And Maya means created, something that's manufactured. It's not illusion. Illusion means something totally different. And so when we mistakenly say that, yeah, sab kuch Maya hai, you know, there's a fatalistic element that comes into it. What we're actually saying, and we should be recognizing, this is creation, this is created, and it is. In the Yoga Shastra, we define this as An-Maya Kosha, the kosha which is made from An. And so Maya means manufactured. Okay, so all of creation is manufactured. But the essence of what we are, the Anand Maya Kosh, the kosh that's made of Anand, is not manufactured with a start date and end date like physical stuff. Okay, so that also is our civilizational arc. Now, when you look at this creation, an identity which has got a vision which encompasses everything, and which takes a person from the physical aspects of Kam right the way through to moksha, has done everything it needs to do. When moksha is attained, the Jivatma doesn't reincarnate. The Atma unites with Paramatma. So if creation has a purpose, we have worked it all out. There is nothing left to be worked out. And we refined it to such a degree that we could go from birth to end of this particular lifetime, having the maximum anand for the maximum number of people and jivas, with the minimum amount of suffering and the minimum amount of consumption. That is the essence of our identity. Totally different to the other identities that we encountered. How is it that a person goes from here and goes to the United Kingdom and lives in a particular way, which is so positive and beneficial? What is it they carry? Assuming that the moment of birth they are a complete white sheet, nothing is written there. We have this thing called sanskaras. And sanskaras are the repositories of the intelligence, the accumulated wisdom of a society and how we transfer it from generation to generation. So your identity is the container of all of that civilizational wisdom. And that identity allows us to go to remote places and just do what we normally do. And to do it without having to calculate, scheme, plot, or plan. You know, we have some principles. We have Jardikana, right? That's a sanskar. You get it at a very young age, and it changes your outlook and the way in which you approach existence. We have so many others. So sanskars are really important. Sanskars seed an identity between the age of 2 and probably between 5 and 7. That period in our existence is one in which our faculty of reasoning has not yet evolved. And so whatever is given to a child by an authority figure in that age is accepted as truth, straight away. And that becomes a sanskar. It becomes imprinted deeply in our subconscious, and we make our choices on it without having to calculate at each and every step of the way. Yeah, the notion of not harming any other living creature, we accept it. We don't compute and come to a logical conclusion that this is positive or not. We accept it, we live it, and we realize the benefits of it at a later point. So sanskaras are really important. They are the cornerstones, the building blocks of a civilizational identity. As I'm talking, I can almost see people pattern matching. Okay, these are our sanskaras. What are the other sanskaras of other civilizations? And that's important. I was hoping you would do that. The conclusion of a society which has worked out all of those little bits, put them into sanskaras, communicate them from generation to generation, communicate them across place to place, is the creation of a peak civilizational identity. And it's an identity which has infinite diversity, because we have principles. You can have 1,000 paramparas. The principle is that they are non-toxic. They do not have othering. So have 100,000 paramparas, it doesn't matter. So you have the maximum diversity, the ultimate in human expression, in art, in science, because none of it is conflicting with any other aspect of it. Infinite diversity, functioning harmoniously. This is who we are. This is the inheritance that we have. That's our identity, and everything is great. Yeah, we think if the whole world, in fact, I said this once in Parliament at a meeting, I said if the whole of Britain operated on dharmic principles, we would see a 300% increase in GDP. We would see an 88% drop in prison populations. Why don't you all become Hindus? And at that point there was a little bit of a ripple through the audience. But that is who we are. What I've done to start with is identify what the Indic identity is. Ultimate diversity, harmoniously interacting, civilizationally at a peak. Minimum suffering, maximum anand. And that's what attracted the other identities to Bharat. The Sone ki Chidiya idea was what appealed to those who were determined to get as much arth as possible. We had people who travelled by foot across land over months and across the oceans to find the other elements of wealth. What is it that is at the centre of our being? So many people travelled to find themselves. Only 4 or 5 years ago, before COVID, I was here at a wedding in Jaipur, and it was a young couple who were getting married. They'd come from the United Kingdom to get married, and the groom had many white English friends, and sort of rugby players, beer drinkers, and the whole thing. And we were sitting in one of the hotels in the evening, and one of these young men, he came and sat next to me with a pint glass in his hand, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said, I've got a question I'd like to ask you. I think you're the person to tell me. I said, okay, go ahead. And he said, they say that people come to India to find themselves. And things happen. I've been here for 2 days and I'm not feeling anything just yet. So even he had somewhere deep in his understanding the idea that this is a land where people came to find treasures, especially the treasures which answer the questions of who we are and what we are. This is the Dharmakshetra. Our main Shastra in this age starts with Dharmakshetra, Kurukshetra, whereas my talk is going to be Dharmakshetra, Adharmakshetra. Because if there is a point at which the identities start to have conflict, and we are a purely dharmic identity, then it's the adharmic identity that we need to understand. Why is it that we have conflict with it? We have been largely blissfully unaware of the elements that are out there that don't like us. We don't understand why that would be, because we are dharmic in our vision. Jaisi drishti, vaisi srishti. We see them as perhaps people who are a little bit confused, and if we explain it to them, everything will be okay and the world will be a wonderful place. We have successively lost our capacity to identify a dharma. And so now that I've given a clear understanding of what dharma is, I'm going to move to adharma within that framework from a dharmic lens. So I spoke about the 4 purushartha. The identities which struggle with us don't have 4 purushartha. They only have 2. And some of them only have 1. So let's turn first to the ones which have Kam as their value system. Remember what I said, that you can have Anand in an adharmic way as well. An addiction is Anand, which is adharmic. And Anand, from the point of view of the Yoga Shastras, is the stimulation of the physical form to experience some sort of delight. When a person takes drugs, when in yoga as well, we have 6 senses. 6 senses, not just 5, because we define citta as being the plane of consciousness. And anything which contributes and creates a ripple in citta is a sense. Okay? And so when we have we defeat somebody, that sense that I am better than that person, that also creates a little bit of anand. It creates anand. Citta is impacted upon, but it's detrimental, it's harmful, it's adharmic. So people who are stuck in Kam, they pursue stimulation of the physical form through the 5 senses. And that's their value system. Now it's important to realize this, because a person whose value system is only dictated by do I get more calm or do I get less calm is capable of the most heinous violence. Because their judgment says, if I get lots of anand from this, then it's good. And they are immune to the value system which says this is not good. And we see this played out on the streets of Bharat at a regular interval now. You know, we see people who are, only a few days, not so long ago, we saw what happened to the Palghar Sadhus. Right, the people who were attacking them and who ultimately killed them didn't feel remorse. They didn't feel pain as they were striking them. There was no empathy there. And I would suggest that they actually got anand from doing it. Because if with each blow they had been suffering, they would have stopped straight away. So there are identities who secure an advantage, an increase in anand, on the basis of Kam alone. Extending that principle a little bit further, we have those identities which they get anand from Kam, but they also get anand from the acquisition of artha. And so their value system then is not so much about is it good, is it bad, is it going to be of benefit to society. It's the bottom line, you know, it's the golden dollar, the bucks, etc. And that's the value system. So when they engage with us, we are transacting on the basis of dharmic values. They are transacting on the basis of adharmic profit. And this is where we struggle to reconcile and understand how to do it. Even to this day, we still do it. Yep. Less so, I must admit, since 2014, less so. There is a tendency amongst us to get a little bit of anand from being gracious, that overly dyalu nature, sattvic ahankar, as one of my friends calls it. We get anand from it, but it's adharmic because it causes suffering. When Somnath was destroyed the first time round, the second time round, the number of times violent people have been forgiven, right? We feel anand from being magnanimous, but it's adharmic. They feel anand because they got away with it. Yeah, till we've done it 10 times, we'll do it another 6 times. We'll just carry on demolishing Somnath. And we don't recognize it because we're thinking they could be dharmic. Right? What we saw on the streets of Leicester was Kam and Arth was the objective. They derived anand from it. When they were standing outside the walls of temples, and we had Hindu elders inside the mandir coming out, having done Pitri Puja and so on, those young men were screaming and shouting. They were getting hatred, the rage that was in their eyes, but they were immensely stimulated. They enjoyed doing it. They had no empathy or compassion with the elders who were terrified by what they were doing. I would suggest that they actually experienced even more anand from doing it. And so we must recognize that there is a difference of value system. I would go as far as to say that even when we have our Prime Minister sitting at the G20, he will be negotiating from a dharmic perspective. Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas is essentially dharmic. But there will be people around that table who are negotiating purely from an arth-based perspective. One person looks for win-win, the others look for win-lose is perfectly fine. So there is a play of the Purusharth going on all the time. I'm going to define slavery now, because I think this is pertinent to the conversation that we're having, and the decisions that we're all going to be making in the future. Slavery is probably defined as freedom of movement being restricted, the capacity to receive the fruits of one's labor not being in one's own control, the choices that you can make being limited, and your capacity to change any of those statuses is not in your hands. Is that fair enough? That's a pretty reasonable definition of slavery. So I'm going to put it in a slightly other way. I mentioned that when you open your eyes, we find ourselves here. All of us, when we were born, we opened our eyes, we found ourselves here. We have a certain amount of prana shakti in our lifetime. And then a moment comes when that's gone. And we use that prana shakti for our journey and to benefit those who we actually are close to and who we feel for. So slavery, in my mind, is using somebody else's prana shakti for your benefit and not for their benefit. And the more of it you use, the more it is in terms of being an enslavement. Now there's an interesting point here, in that slavery we all think is locking people up at night. You've got the slaves, they do their work, they've got shackles, they've got chains, and then when it comes to the evening, we lock them up in the rooms, we give them a bit of water, some dried bread, and then out they go. That's the next step. But there was a statement made by a German philosopher, von Goethe, which is one of my very dear statements. I use it to remind myself all the time. And in that statement he said, "None are so enslaved as those who falsely believe themselves to be free." So he highlighted a mechanism whereby you could enslave people and they would never know about it. Okay? And if you have got Kam and Arth as your driving goals, you can multiply the amount of Kam and Arth you get by stealing the efforts and the labor and the produce of other people. If you just do a normal 9 to 5 day's worth of work in a shop somewhere, you're not going to save up to get a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. But if you can get 100 people working, then you can take a little bit of each and every one of them, their contribution, and you can get more Kam and more Arth. If you do it without them even knowing, that would really appeal to somebody whose civilizational value is as much Kam and Arth as possible, because they'd also get a thrill from the fact that they're deceiving everybody else and nobody knows what's going on. So Goethe said, none are so enslaved as those who falsely believe themselves to be free. Probably the greatest empire built on slavery until modern times was the Roman Empire. Does anybody know when the Roman Empire ceased to exist?
Yeah, when the Germanic tribes attacked and they had actually that over-reliance.
Thank you. That's the answer that we've all been taught. It never ceased to exist. Something happened in the reign of Constantine. He had a big rambling empire, trouble on his borders with the Germanic tribes and many other tribes. He had a huge army distributed all across the continent, and he was struggling to pay them. All the taxes he was getting was being given to support the armed forces. And he noticed in a far-flung corner of his empire, in this tiny little land called Judea, a strange phenomenon. And that was, there were people who were willing to kill each other for an idea. There were these tribes who were warring and literally killing each other, taking each other's lives, because one had said this is true and another said no, this is true. So he thought, this is very interesting. There are people who are willing to go even that far just for an idea. What is that? Or what is it that makes them work? So he started to scrutinize what was happening there, and he came across these followers of Christ, allegedly. And there is some question marks over that. But he came across these people, and he thought, right, two things. One, I need to get them to come to peace and come to reconciliation. But secondly, he thought, I need to know the mechanism whereby these people have been trained, educated to the level where they will even kill each other for an idea. Because if I can appropriate that technology, I can get my whole empire to enslave itself to me. They don't need to kill each other, they just need to kill the opponents. But I can get them all enslaved to me, and that's my empire dealt with. And he convened, 400 years after the death of Jesus, he convened the Council of Nicaea, and they gathered all these textbooks, these conflicting stories of history. Got rid of some, kept the others, but what they created was a mechanism for conditioning humanity to become enslaved without ever realizing that's what it was. It's the first manual for hacking a human being. In the same way that the Bhagavad Gita detoxifies and unhacks a human being, the textbook that they put out, its purpose and its achievement was to hack human beings so that they would have intellect compromised. Their heart would be compromised. And then if you have got the key to bringing both of those back to some sort of health, then the person is beholden to you. They become enslaved. And so what he did, he transformed, and Theodosius, who was the one who came after him, they transformed their empire from an emperor with consuls, with tax collectors, into the voice of God. Now we have a tradition where we have the capacity, we're trained to ignore Nam and Rup and look at Tattva. Nam and Rup is name and form. And if you want to deceive somebody, you use name and form. Somebody who is used to wielding Tattva, the capacity to look at the essence of something, is very, very hard to deceive. So if you look at the Nam and the Rup of the modern-day Roman Catholic Church, there is a man, he sits in a palace, a very wealthy man with a huge bank, probably the biggest bank on the planet. He has representatives in every country. The Vatican is actually a nation state, even in the EU. they recognize it as a country. And it was a very interesting turn of events whereby they managed to achieve that. And he has people paying tax, normally 10% of their income, right, into his coffers without him having to send tax collectors to do it. So the Roman Empire never disappeared. It's hidden in plain sight. Naam roop badal gaya, but the tattva is exactly the same. And they control huge amounts of land and resources. But they're a civilization which, according to my analysis, is in pursuit of Kam and Arth. Kam and Arth. And we see this in the manner in which their identity has afflicted suffering on a huge number of humanity, so many people. And there was a Sunday Times article only 4 months ago, that in Italy itself, over 1 million children had been abused by members of the clergy, just within Italy itself. That's not individual acts of criminality, it's individuals who suffered multiple acts of criminality. And yet the people who were inflicting these acts of criminality, they derived anand from their activities. They didn't do it under pain, they did it under some sort of addictive stimulation. Kam and Arth versus the four Purusharth. And then the first ever franchise in history occurred, where they franchised their total little outfit to the British. It wasn't quite like that, but it was close. Henry VIII said, okay, I'm not going to follow you guys, I'm going to do my own thing. And he set up the Church of England. And the Church of England is the driving force behind the emergence of this new empire. The British Empire was a Kam and Arth empire. Now, something to note, I've just said to you, this is what the Roman Empire was, and this is what the British Empire was. The world doesn't think of them in that manner. Because what they were also very effective at doing, not being bound by the necessity to speak truth. Because sometimes you incur a loss when you speak truth, and they don't want to incur a loss. They created their empires, hid them in plain sight, and have been covering up with stories ever since. Now, it's the nature of the beast that once they've acquired a huge amount of wealth, they suddenly need to acquire the trappings of charity, the appearance of magnitude, the appropriation of virtues, and then the dissemination of vices to everybody else. And so they have created an identity which is designed to protect their Kam Arth empire. And that identity has been seeded everywhere else. We see it being replenished all the time. We had 10 days of Her Majesty's funeral. Now, do you remember what I said to you about seeding sanskar? Just think of all of the children around the globe who saw the funeral, the majesty, the pomp and ceremony of it all. Those children have got sanskar now, that somewhere out there is a royal family, and they're amazing people, and the world thinks of them so highly. This is seeding sanskar. That's why it needed to be done for 10 days. We have a whole generation in the United Kingdom who witnessed this, and their children. And they were standing there on the roads with their little banners, and tears streaming down their eyes. This is seeding sanskar. And yet how many of us saw that as the tattva of what was doing, because it was hidden behind the naam roop, the name and form. Now, if you have built an empire, and you've got lots and lots of gold tucked away that you've stolen from places, and diamonds and the Kohinoor and everything else, and then you've concealed it, an identity which can pierce through all of the smoke and mirrors, and which says, no, it's happier for human beings to be free and not enslaved, that identity is a threat to you. Just by virtue of its existence, even though it may not pose an offensive threat to you, the very fact of its existence is a threat to you. And this is the conundrum that Duryodhana faced when Krishnaji came to him and said, just give us 5 villages tucked away somewhere in the remote corner of a kingdom. Duryodhana said, no, not even the amount of sand that fits on the point of a needle. Why? Because he knew the identity of the Pandavas would be a threat, a civilizational threat, to everything he had constructed. He knew that he was doing things that were unpleasant, that people had suffered, and the revelation of that in years to come would be a threat. So no, he was not able to do that.